So I had managed to get a copy of Martyr from my local library, and it was only available as a 7-day hold, so I have until tomorrow to finish it. So I spent my morning finishing that up, and I just got back from going to my local independent bookstore to pick up a copy. So this is my copy of Martyr by Kaveh Akbar. It is 331 pages long, so I'm actually pretty happy I was able to get through it so quickly. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the reading experience because I'm not yet ready to talk about my thoughts on the book. So what I will say, and this is what I actually liked about the book, is it's actually quite challenging to read. Most of the book is from the main character Cyrus's perspective, but there are a lot of chapters that are written from other people's perspectives, and often those characters are only in the book for that one particular chapter. So it can make it a little bit challenging to follow, especially if you are dipping in and out of it. So I listened to a large chunk of this last Sunday. I think I listened to around 5 hours of it, and then my plan was to work through about an hour or so of the audiobook every day. So I would listen to 30 minutes during my commute to work and then listen to another 30 minutes in the evening. I would not recommend reading this book in this way. It got very confusing going in and out of it because I often would stop a chapter midway and then pick it back up, and then I couldn't remember whose perspective the chapter was being written from. So when I picked it up today, I actually went back and re-listened to parts of it that I knew I wasn't quite following. So that is my one piece of advice if you're going to read this book. I think this is a really great book for a trip. If you want to go on vacation and only want to take one book with you, then I would recommend doing that with this. But definitely not something that you can be reading little bits and pieces of, unless you have really good memory. I don't have the best memory, so maybe that's why, but I would just find after reading it in the morning and then having a full day at work, by the time I picked it back up after work, I couldn't really remember whose perspective the chapter was in. Whereas today, when I listened to like 6 hours of it, I was just fully immersed in the story, and so I could follow it. I'm not sure how I feel about one aspect of the plot. I'm still mulling it over a little bit. The plot took a turn in a way that I kind of thought it would from reading the back of the book, but I was still a little bit disappointed that it went that way. And I feel like if the plot hadn't gone in that way, I probably would have given it 5 stars. Now I'm not sure if I can give it that, but we'll see. So when I was listening to the audiobook, I made a number of bookmarks. So I decided to pick up the physical copy because I wanted to add my annotations to this. And I knew the audiobook is due back tomorrow, so I only have today/tomorrow to do that. I don't do that with every book that I read. Like if I don't really enjoy the book, I don't bother with the annotations, but I did quite like this. I wanted to support the author. It's very different from any book I've ever really read. I think the last book I read that I felt a similar way about was The Idiot by Elif Botman. And I have a copy of both The Idiot and Either Or by Elif Botman, and Either Or is the second book in this series. I think this is the sort of book that has very mixed reviews, but I really enjoyed this novel, talking about a Turkish-American Harvard University student. Just a very unique perspective, and you can also tell that the author is very intelligent and adds little bits and pieces of like philosophy and film and art into her novel. I felt the same way about Martyr. It's very clear that Akbar is a very intelligent person. I would also say very cultured. So there are a lot of references that he talks to or alludes to that I want to go back and read. There was even one chapter where it's from the perspective of Rumi, and you have Rumi smoking a joint, and it was just so amazing. I was like, this is everything that I want in a novel. I learned a lot about Sufism, Iranian history. It was just so interesting. Really, really great. Really good book. So that is probably all I'm going to film for today's reading vlog, but I will check back in tomorrow showing you where I'm at. I am back today to talk a little bit more about Martyr by Kaveh Akbar. So this novel follows a character whose name is Cyrus, and Cyrus is originally from Iran but moved to America with his father when he was young. And Cyrus is a recovering alcoholic, a recovering addict. He is a poet, and in this novel, he's very interested in the concept of martyrs. And when one thinks of the term martyr, I feel like they often think of someone who's choosing to sacrifice themselves for the sake of their religion. However, Cyrus is particularly interested in the concept of secular martyrs, and also martyrs who are pacifists. And part of the reason why Cyrus is interested in this idea of martyrs is he, at this point in time, is an orphan, and he feels like both of his parents' deaths were meaningless. And he starts to explore this idea of martyrdom, of people who die for a cause that is bigger than themselves. So I'm not going to talk about this book in too much detail. I still am trying to gather my thoughts and talk about it in a cohesive way, but I'm just going to talk about some aspects of this novel that I really enjoyed. So I was watching an interview of the author yesterday. During the interview, they talked about the beauty of using a novel as a vehicle for a message. And one of the reasons they were saying that is in a novel, you have the opportunity to have these dialogues about these philosophical concepts and ideas. Whereas if you have an essay, a polemic, a nonfiction book, it's not conversational, so you often are just getting one side of the story. Whereas in a novel like this, you have interesting philosophical ideas which are explored in more detail through conversations between the characters. And that is something that I really enjoy in novels. I particularly like that in Dostoevsky's books. But I would say that this is a much more accessible version of that. I think with a lot of classics that do that, they go into these really long conversations, which I find fascinating, but I don't think will appeal to many people because it's a little bit tedious to get through. You don't have that experience with this novel. It is very easy to understand what the characters are talking about. I think part of it is that the author uses a lot of slang, so it just makes it much more accessible to everyday readers. And they didn't talk about this in the interview, but it was something that I was thinking about. I'm really interested in this idea of the philosophy of art. What is art there for? And I also am very interested in methods of education. I really think that comedy is like the ultimate method of portraying a message because I feel like comedies appeal to so many more people. You attract people who probably would not sit down and read a philosophical text talking about martyrdom, but are drawn to this novel because it's very witty, very sarcastic, and very funny. I also think that the fact that Akbar wrote this in a funny way and made this, I don't want to say it's a comedy because I don't think it can really be put in a category like that, but he definitely uses comedy as a means to share this idea. And I think for that reason, I would say that this is probably the best novel I've read so far this year, just because it's so hard to take a very challenging concept like this and take very interesting philosophical conversations and put them into a comedic format that is really easy for the everyday person to read and to understand. So for me, I really enjoyed the style that the author used in writing this novel. I just think it's a way in which this message will be read by the most number of people. I could be wrong, but that's just my thoughts of it. Definitely does jump around. For some people, they might say it's disorganized, but I think it's probably the way the author's brain works. Watching his interview is just so fascinating. Listening to him because he jumps around with lots of different topics. I actually naturally am like that also. And so for me, I didn't mind it. I was like there on the journey with him. But for some people, they might just find it a little bit too disjointed and not like it. It's very experimental in nature, which is what I like about it, but for some people that might turn them off. I just really like when authors are brave and try new things. There was one review I was watching earlier today and they said they didn't like it because of like there are dream sequences in the novel and there's poetry within the novel and they didn't like those aspects to it. Whereas I appreciate authors that try new things. And it's funny, when I think of dream sequences, I always think of The Sopranos because The Sopranos has all of these random dream sequences in it, which at first I really hated, but now I've grown to love. And I feel the same way about this. I think the dream sequences worked. I understood what the author was doing, I might have struggled a little bit more if I was sitting and reading it, but listening to it as an audiobook, it just made sense. It made so much sense. I really liked all of the ways in which Akbar was experimenting with novel as a style. I think what I like the least about it actually is the plot. Listening to that interview yesterday, he talked about the fact that people assume that a lot of poets who write novels are going to do novels that are less plot driven and might be more like an internal journey, and he was very intentional in not wanting to do that. And he likes novels or stories. He's really interested in stories and wanted to tell a story. I think for me, that's what I didn't like about it. I felt like the plot didn't really add to it. In fact, I felt like the plot detracted from it. But if that was his goal to do, I mean, he definitely made a book that was very interesting in terms of the plot, and in a sense keeps you on the edge of your seat because you're just like, what is going on? What? And that and that. For me, it took away from it because it felt a little bit unrealistic. For a first novel, this is incredible. I ended up giving it 5 stars. I wouldn't say it's my perfect book, but it was very unique and unlike anything I've ever read before. Definitely made me more interested in reading Iranian literature, which I already had wanted to do, and Iranian poetry. And I'm also now a lot more interested in Sufism. When it comes to trying to read books by different authors who have a unique story to tell, this definitely was up there, and I'm really glad that I gave this a read. So I had received a question like months ago and I've just never made a video about it. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how I find the books that I put on my TBRs and that I just read in general, because I have really been trying to be intentional about reading books by diverse authors. And I think other people want to do the same, but they're just curious about how I find some of the books that I choose to read. So first I'm going to talk about Penguin. I actually go on Penguin's website quite often, and I look at both the Penguin Classics and the Penguin Modern Classics. So with the Penguin Classics, and those are the Penguin books with the black spine. So this is The Laws by Plato. So these are the Penguin Classics I'm talking about. So I go on the website, and I specifically go on the UK website, and I'll see if I can find the link, and if I can, I'll include it in the description box. And when I'm on that link, I like to filter by language. There is also an option to filter by region, but I don't find the region option works as well as language. And so, for example, when I was working on my September books that I wanted to read, I knew I wanted a classic, but I wanted a classic by an author from a different country. So I was looking at books by Brazilian authors, so I had filtered by language as Portuguese. And I also was interested in books by someone from the Middle East, so I had filtered by language as Arabic and language as Farsi. And from using the Farsi option, that's how I came across Blind Owl. So that is one way that I find diverse reads. Secondly, on the Penguin website, I like to look at the Penguin Modern Classics section. I don't really use filter options on the Modern Classics side. What I do instead is I spend hours going through the Penguin Modern Classics list. When I looked at it last week, I think there were like 64 pages. So I just go through every single page and write down any book that seems interesting to me. The reason why I like the Penguin Modern Classics is they include both fiction and nonfiction. So that was how I came across decolonial Marxism and also Black Marxism. I have a few editions of the Penguin Modern Classics, but I just want to show you what they look like. So here I have Sister Outsider by Audre Lorde. I actually need to finish this. I've never read all of the essays in this. I have read The Master's Tools Will Never Dismantle the Master's House, which is excellent, and I would highly recommend it if you haven't read it before. But yeah, I really should finish reading this book. I just brought this out to show you what the Penguin Modern Classics look like. The ones I have this color spine and look like this, but I think the older editions were silver. So yeah, I'll just go through and look at diverse reads based on the Penguin Modern Classics list. And the last place I've started looking at recently are other publishing companies. So the two that I've been interested in are Verso and Pluto Press. They seem to be publishing houses that focus on more radical texts. So I've seen a lot of books about anti-imperialism, anti-capitalism, definitely a lot of Marxist works from both of those publishing companies, also a lot of feminist texts. So I also do like to go on their websites and see what books they have. And what I do like about both of these companies is that if you purchase a physical book, you also get a free edition of the ebook, which is something that I feel like more companies should do. Like for me, if a book is really good, I usually want to get the audiobook, physical book, and ebook. I find ebooks are really helpful for referencing back later on because you can just easily search through the ebook. And when it also comes to transferring my quotes into like the sort of database system that I'm trying to create, ebooks are the easiest. If it's a physical book, I then have to type everything up, which is just a bit tedious. So I do find if I really like a book, I will probably have all 3 editions unless it's easily accessible from my library. So in my ideal world, I would get the audiobook from the library and then I would be able to just purchase a physical copy, which also comes with an ebook, which at least these publishing companies do. So I haven't purchased from any of them yet, but I will be placing an order with Verso Books because they currently have 40% off. I think it's if you buy 4 books or more. Definitely not sponsored because I have a very tiny channel, but that is why I plan to purchase from them finally. I had been a bit hesitant because I wasn't sure about the import issues with Canada, but I do think that books are duty-free, but we'll see. I will let you know when I place that order. So those are just a few of the ways that I try to look for diverse books, you know, anti-colonial or anti-imperialist in nature, or fiction books that are written by diverse authors. So I think I'm probably going to end the reading vlog there. I did just finish Fathers and Sons, but I am not going to talk about that in too much detail right now. I have another vlog where I was talking about reading Fathers and Sons. I'm probably going to post that a little bit later on. I just really wanted to talk about Martyr, so I ended up cutting my reading vlog into 2, and I'm posting the second half of it first, and then I'm going to post the first half of it later. I just wanted to talk about Martyr, and I just really didn't want to wait to edit all of my content in order to publish it. But yeah, I would say if you're looking for a contemporary book that is different, that explores unique issues, and that will allow you to learn more about and life experience that is probably fairly different from your own, then pick up this book. Do it. It is fantabulous. Thank you so much for watching. This channel is all about re-education and decolonizing the mind. Last year, I quit my job working as a lawyer in private practice, and the process of leaving my job really made me question everything about society, what society tells us will bring fulfillment and happiness. And I just started to question all of that, and I've gone on a journey of reading new books, finding ways to decolonize my mind through literature, through art, through film, and I created this channel as a way to share what I am reading and learning with the world. This channel mainly focuses on the books that I'm reading. I have 2 other channels. One focuses more on lifestyle content, and the second one focuses on video essays. So I also will include the links for those 2 channels in the description box. If you are interested in following along on this journey with me, then feel free to subscribe to any of those channels. And thank you so much for all of the love and support. I will see you in the next one.